Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. For the past few months, I've been doing a test on double-sided tape, and here are just some of the ones that I've been testing. I have my favourite double-sided tape that I've been using for many years. It's a little bit expensive, and now that I'm starting to use a lot more in my bag production, I wanted to try and find an alternative solution, as well as the fact that this has gone up in price so much and I'm finding it more difficult to source. So the one I've been using for years is the Quilter's Wash Away tape from So Easy. It's fantastic. It washes away, it dissolves in water. It doesn't leave any sticky residue on your needles. It's really good to sew with, and I've got nothing bad to say about this other than the fact that it's a little bit expensive. So what I've done is sourced a whole heap of double-sided tape from around Australia and Amazon in the US, and I've done some extensive testing for the work that I do in the shop. The most important thing that I needed was a double-sided tape that wouldn't gum up my needles when I was sewing. So that was my first priority. Then I wanted something that would be adhesive enough to be able to put my fabric and my zipper tapes together without coming apart straight away. And I also wanted something that was a little bit easier to tear. And in saying that, this one is not that easy to tear. So it was always a little bit difficult. So there are lots of great products on the market. Some of them will gum up your needles terribly. Others just don't stick to your fabric. Some are too difficult to tear. Let me stop waffling on and I'll show you what my results have been over the past few months. Keep in mind, this is just my experience of double-sided tape. I'd like to think that there are lots of products on the market that are going to work well for people, and I'll share with you what my absolute favourite was at the end of it. Let's have a look at the brands I've used and some of the results. Okay, so here are some of the products that I've been testing over the past few months. I've got, what have I got here? 7 different tapes. There are a couple of others that I've tried and I have forgotten to keep details for them. And there's also a glue pen. So what we've got here is the Drits Wash Away Wonder tape. There's another Wash Away Wonder tape. The So Easy Wash Away Quilters tape. The Renault art tape that Verna from New Zealand was kind enough to send me to test out. This one here is Kikusui tape. Then there's Sart fabric tape, and then this one here, and I think this one was called Nobo. Let's start with what has always been my favourite tape to use. This is the So Easy Wash Away tape. It's 8mm or 5/16 of an inch wide, and you'll just run that along your fabric and tear it off. Now you can see I'm having difficulty tearing that paper off. So there are 2 things that I've never liked about this tape, and that is that it's so difficult to tear the paper away. And the other thing that I didn't like is that it's 8mm wide. It's a little bit too deep for when I put the zips on. When I place a zip over this and stitch it down, quite often you would still see some of the residue of the double-sided tape after I finished stitching it. So I didn't like the fact that it was a little bit wide and that it was so difficult to tear the paper away, but it is a great product in that you can sew through it without gumming up your needles. That's a So Easy Wash Away tape. And as far as the adhesive properties of this goes, it's not overly adhesive like some of the ones that you can get. It sticks together, but it does come away quite easily. So if you've got a lot of sewing that you're doing and you really need to keep your pieces together, you might want to use a clip or a pin just to keep the layers together, which kind of defeats the purpose of using double-sided tape. This one here is called Renault Art. It's a craft tape, great for scrapbooking and craft tapes. Verna in New Zealand sent me this, and this one here is 3mm wide, or about 1/8 of an inch, and this one is 6mm, or 1/4 of an inch. And that tape tears really easily. So it's so easy to place down on your fabric and easy enough to remove the paper, and it's incredibly tacky, which is what you want when you want to put 2 pieces of fabric together. So it sits on there really well. I did a lot of batch sewing with this double-sided tape, And whilst it's fabulous for adhering layers of fabric or products together and nice to sew through, it's absolutely horrid on your needles. So you can see the fluff on the needle there. This is what's happened when I've used this double-sided tape. And it doesn't just affect your needle, it actually affects your bobbins as well. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. So this Renault art tape, if you're going to use a 6mm or anything wider, for myself, I won't use it again on the sewing machine because it's just got too much gunk built up on the needle. It also affects the eye of the needle, so my thread kept breaking, and I couldn't rethread all the time because there was a build-up of gunk inside the eye of the needle. There are many ways of overcoming that, but I want to be able to sew and not have to worry about gum on my needles. The benefit of the Renault art tape is that they have one that is only 3mm wide. So if you use a 3mm instead of the wider one, you can attach your fabric right to the very edge where you don't sew. Instead of sewing over the double-sided tape, if you sew further away from there, then it's going to keep your layers of fabric in place and you won't get residue on your needle. So if I have to use a product that is going to gum up my needles, I'll go for the one that has got the narrowest width to it so that it causes the least amount of problems with my needle and my machine. That was a Renault art double-sided tape. It's not good for sewing machine needles, but if you use one that's nice and narrow, then it's fine. It's great to tear and it's got really good adhesive properties, but not good on your needles. The next two that I've tried are both from Drits. This is Drits Quilting Wash Away Wonder Tape and this is Drits Wash Away Wonder Tape. I do believe they're both the same thing. They may just be different types of packaging for different locations. I really don't know, but they're basically the same tape. It's harder to tear, which can be a pain sometimes. And this one here is the same as well. It's a little bit more difficult to tear, but this one is still more difficult to tear. It seems like it's an old tape because it's a little bit bubbly underneath. And to remove the paper, I found that it comes away from the fabric straight away and you have to push it back down on your fabric, but then it gets stuck to your fingers. It's the same thing again. It just gets stuck to everything else except for your fabric. And judging by the texture of the tape, I reckon these are exactly the same product. Whilst they work on your fabric, they're not very adhesive. This comes away very easily. Even if I press really hard, it does come away quite easily. So again, like the So Easy tape, you would want to put a clip in place just to keep the layers secure. It's really not that adhesive. But the good thing about the Drits tape is that it does not gum up your needles. So I've had a lot of success using both of those tapes without having any sticky residue on my needles. And as I said, for me, that's the most important part of any of the double-sided tapes. As far as preference of these three, I would still prefer the So Easy tape because it is a little bit more adhesive than these two, but again, it's still too wide. And the Renault art at the moment is not one that I would use. The next one we have, don't know how to pronounce this, Sart or Sart. It is a 1/4 inch wide tape. Place that down on your fabric. It tears really easily. And it's got good adhesive properties in that it doesn't come apart straight away. In fact, I'm struggling to get that apart from the fabric. So that's a very strong double-sided tape. It just sticks to your fingers as well. It's very strong. So it keeps your fabric together really well. Unfortunately, I had the same problem with my needles with this brand of tape. It gummed up the needles terribly. And it causes all sorts of other problems as well. Although it was a really good one to tear off and tape down, it's just not good in the machine. I've had lots of fails over the past few months with these tapes. So even actually look at that, trying to remove it from the fabric is even difficult. So if you accidentally put it in the wrong place, it's not easy to get off. So if you want a super strong double-sided tape, then that brand is definitely the way to go, but I wouldn't sew through it. This one here is Kikusui tape. Now, all the tapes that I've shown you so far have been made in China, and this is the only one that's made in Japan. And I really thought that being made in Japan, having good quality products, it would be a great tape to use. So it tears off really easily. When I try to get the paper off, I usually run my thumbnail across the paper, and then that helps remove that paper from the adhesive. Makes it so much easier. So I'll place that zipper tape over the top of that tape. That's got nice adhesive properties to it, yet you can still remove the tape from your fabric if you need to. Paper tears easily, comes away from your fabric easily enough, but still bonds the two layers together really well, so you don't need to use clips. But I had the same problem with the needles as I've had with most of these other double-sided tapes. So unfortunately, the Kikusui tape, which I really thought was going to be the best one, isn't really that crash hot either. So I'm not going to use that in my sewing anymore. Before I show you the last one, here's what happens when you get a build-up of double-sided tape or glue residue on your needles. So you can see that you get all that fluff built up there. The eye of the needle, as the needle is going up and down and the thread is going across like this, your needle is penetrating the fabric with the needle going up and down, and your thread is going in there as well. And that thread is going back and forth, in and out through the eye of the needle. It brings the gum through, it brings the gum back again as well. The other thing that happens is that as your needle comes down in your machine, whichever way your bobbins work, the residue from the glue also comes down into your bobbin case. So just yesterday I had a lot of trouble with my thread looping underneath my fabric, and it was getting very tight on top. I thought that my tension was out, but it was actually a build-up of glue on the inside of my bobbin case. So I actually had to wash my bobbin and the little spring in some acetone and then cleaned it up with some machine oil just to get rid of all that sticky residue, because I could not sew with all that build-up in my machine. So I had to clean my stitch plate as well and underneath, because the glue residue goes through your machine. I have a jar of acetone that I keep beside my machine, and if my needles are still okay, then I'll pop the needle inside the jar of acetone and just let that soak, rather than having to take my needles out and clean them all the time, because I don't have time to do all of that. So the acetone washes away that glue residue, and then I can dry the needle and use it up later. That's what happens to your machine and your needles when you use a double-sided tape that's just a little bit too tacky, and that glue residue ends up on your needles, your stitch plate, in your bobbin case. And I haven't had that happen with these three products. The Wash Away Quilters tapes, and they all say wash away. So I guess that's a great indicator straight away to tell you that that's going to work on your machine without gumming up your needle. Now, before I show you the absolute best double-sided tape that I've discovered, I'm going to show you how the glue pens work. I love glue pens, and I used to do a lot of English paper piecing, and it's absolutely fantastic for gluing fabric and paper together and then allowing the fabric to be removed from the paper. You can get refillable glue sticks. This is a Soline brand, but there are many other brands that you can use. So what you'll do is run your stick along the edge of the fabric, and you can see the blue glue along there. You don't want to use too much, and you'll just place that down on the edge of your fabric there, and that's glued it in place. You do want to wait a few seconds just for it to dry properly, and then it'll sit nicely in place. It also comes away really easily as well, and you can sew over that. When I had the quilt shop, I used to sell a lot of this because English paper piecing was very popular at the time. It's great for putting zips in trousers in, but some people would use too heavy a layer of glue by pressing too hard and making it really thick. And whilst that works and gives you better adhesion, it's much more difficult to remove that later on. So it works really well. You can still sew through it and everything. If you want to use a fabric glue stick, you only really need to have a thin layer of glue to hold your product in place. I've also tried using things like Yoo-hoo glue, just the craft glue sticks. They're absolutely terrible. They'll wreck your fabric. But I haven't tried machine sewing through them. But I do know that these fabric glue pens work really well. I've got one final double-sided tape to show you. This one I ordered from Amazon. It came in a pack of 3 and I really didn't hold out any hope for this. I just thought it's a cheap, nasty double-sided tape, but I'll give it a go anyway. This one here, spread it out, pull the tape off. It's a little bit more difficult to pull the paper off than those other ones, but it's still better than the Sew Easy tape. This one is a 6mm or 1/4 inch. Comes away from the paper easily and it's nice and sticky. So you can see that it's nice and tacky there. And it will come away from your fabric if you need to remove it. Surprisingly, this double-sided tape was an absolute dream to use. I think this was only about $14 for a packet of 3. It's called Hoe Top and it's absolutely amazing. Of the 3 rolls, this is all I have left. It's been absolutely brilliant. I was using it right up until yesterday's batch sewing project, and it's an absolute dream to use. I haven't had any needles gum up at all. I've had no sticky residue in my machine or anywhere else, and it's just really beautiful to sew with. So that's the Hoe Top double-sided tape. So here are the tapes that worked for me. Sew Easy, super expensive. I used to sell this for about $15 a reel. The Drits tapes were a little bit cheaper than the Sew Easy tape, and you only get about 10 metres or 10 or 11 yards on each of these. And this Hoe Top double-sided tape comes in a packet of 3. It cost me about $14.80 for a pack of 3. That's Australian dollars. And I believe it's got about 20 or so yards on each reel. That seems like a lot. I don't know how I've gone through so much of it in such a short time. So we've got 3 of them that are 6mm in width, and this one is 8mm. Although it's good, it's a little bit thick and difficult to tear the paper. Now, whilst these 4 brands are really good for not leaving any residue, I won't use the Drits again. It just doesn't have enough tackiness to it. And although the Sew Easy tape has been my favourite for many years, I won't be using that again because it's too wide and too expensive, especially given I use so much. And now that I've done my testing and found a product that I really like, that has worked beautifully for me, I'm going to use the Hoe Top double-sided tape from now on. Well, what did you think of that? After months of testing, I finally found a product that I can really be happy with. It's going to hold the layers of fabric together. It's not going to do any more damage to my machine or my needles. And it's really well priced as well. I do realise that there are lots of other brands on the market. It really just comes down to testing everything out and seeing what it does to your machine, to your fabric, even to your fingers. One of the brands of tape that I used, and I think it was a Kikusui tape, must have had so much acid in there that it actually caused blistering of my fingertips. So my fingers on both hands peeled all the way down to the knuckles. So that's something to be mindful of. I didn't think my skin was that sensitive. So I will use it up, but only in very small doses, and I'll use it on the back of my labels instead. So I've got lots of adhesive tape that I will have to get rid of. All I'm going to do is just put it on the back of my labels or any areas that I know that I'm not going to stitch. So it won't go to waste, it'll get used, but certainly not on the sewing machine. The Ho Top double-sided tape was an absolute dream to use. Yesterday I ordered another 6 rolls of this because I want to make sure I don't miss out when everybody goes off and buys this. But I really do recommend the Ho Top double-sided tape. Comes in a pack of 3, is really economical, and it works a dream. It's got good enough adhesive properties that it'll keep my zips and fabric nicely positioned together. If it weren't for the expense of the So Easy tape and the width of it, I would be more than happy to continue using that one as well. It's my last batch, so I'll definitely use it. And the Drits I'll definitely use up in my sewing projects as well. But as for anything else, I'm going to make sure they stay well away from any of my sewing machine needles and bobbin cases. I do just want to say that I haven't been paid for my opinion on all of this. This is just my opinion. This is what I've experienced with these tapes. There are lots of tapes out there that are really nice to use. I just couldn't try absolutely everything. But I think a general rule of thumb, though, is if you find a double-sided tape that tears really easily and has really good tacky properties to it, it's probably going to gum up your needle. Whereas the ones that I found that were a little bit more difficult to tear off, they weren't as tacky, they didn't gum up my needle. I think that's the simplest way to find out if any of these double-sided tapes are going to cause any issues with your fabric or your machine. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a long time coming. Thanks for your patience, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.